Oh,
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Yo.
Oh, oh, snap! He returns.
Cool. All right, let's get started. All right, well, I'm gonna try to end early today, because the Tech Plus Plus event to it is tonight. If you didn't know about that already, highly recommend going. Um, it's at 6. So I can send more details in Slack. Is anybody going that's on the call? I think I know some people are.
yeah.
That should be.
Yeah, I was planning on going.
Okay, cool. Good. Should be fun. Just tell people it's like pretty tech oriented meetings. Just tell people you're taking OK Coders, and they should be familiar. And it's have fun. It's a fun event. So yeah, I'll see you all there. So we'll try to end maybe 15 minutes early. And yeah. Okay, so I mentioned that I would kind of share the bottles of beer thing today. I want to just focus on functions today, so I'll share the bottles of beer thing Saturday. So if you still want to work on that, you can. And today we'll just dive into functions because it's like the most important thing in programming is functions. They're an essential piece to understand. So yeah, let's dive in. Okay. Is it big enough? Somebody has to say yes because I can't see you anymore since I started sharing my screen.
Yes.
Looks good.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to make a folder real quick for day 3. And then make an index.html file. And then I'm going to go ahead and make an index.js file. No CSS today. And then in the index.html file, we will add our HTML. What is that fancy shortcut you guys were using to generate all that? Was it Bang?
Yep.
Oh wow.
Ye-
Dang, that's cool. Okay. Um, functions, the title, here's our body, and then we need to link our script tag. So that was script, and then I think source, and then dot slash. You'll see this. So technically, I think I could just put index.js. Sometimes you'll see people put dot slash. The dot means the current directory. So this is saying the file in the current directory that's named index.js is what this stands for. And then we will close the script tag. There we go. Now we have our script tag linked. We might as well just put something on the page. Functions. And then now we will spend all of our time in this index.js file Nothing in here quite yet, but let's go ahead and just console log. Hello world. Oh, I need to turn Mr. GPT off. But hello world is like a very common thing in programming you will see people do all the time, because there's like a very famous book on one of the early programming languages, and the first program they wrote was one called Hello World. And so you'll see console log hello world, or like you'll see it on like starter websites sometimes. So there's some programming history to that term. So we will just console log hello world, and then we will open up this in live server to make sure it's working. So we've got functions, the h1 showing up, and then I need to do what to see that console log?
Gotta grab the console.
Command Shift J.
Yeah, or F12. I don't know if that works on there. I don't know how
Command
Macs work.
Command Option J.
Command Option J.
Yep. But yeah, we need to open the console from the developer tools. We get that open. We see hello world coming from our index.js file from line 1. So we're all good. We're hooked up. Okay. So, how, if I want to write a function, what's the syntax? So I want to write a function. I want to give it the name hello world, and I don't want it to have any body at the moment. So what's the syntax for that?
Yeah, function right at the front.
Good, function.
Then
Then-
hello world and camel case.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and then parentheses, left and right. Yep, and then your brackets.
Good. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So we've got a very useless function here. How do I call it? How do I run the function?
Just type with the parentheses in it.
Sorry, say that one more time.
Just type the word hello world and then the parentheses.
Exactly. Okay. Very good. Is this gonna work? Is this okay, what I just did? Like
No.
if we
Yes.
look at this, yeah, if we look at this in the console, is this okay? I heard a no, and then I think I heard a yes. Does anybody, I guess, whoever said no, why no?
You didn't define what you wanted well, I guess it's an empty function on the second instance, but you didn't define it yet.
Okay. And then whoever said yes, what's the reasoning there?
Aren't all functions that are defined in the code available anywhere in the code, like it's automatically remapped?
Good. Okay. So I think the yes is correct, but no is correct based off like what we've seen so far. Like that is the correct deduction or extension of what we learned so far. So if we were just declaring a variable, like if we were doing const, test equals some string or something like that, and we, try to use the variable before that, that is bad. So like, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't try to access a variable before you define it. But with functions, there's something in JavaScript called the two-pass system. And so what it does when it's evaluating this file is it goes to the file and it looks for functions and declares them and makes them available to you. And then it actually also does that for variables. So technically, console logging test here, I don't think we'll throw an error. Let's just actually look at the program real quick. Yeah, okay. So cannot access test before initialization. Now, I think if this was actually a var, oh, I can't use that same name, obviously, but say test2. Yeah, and let's console log, or let's comment out that. You'll see that, well, let me explain this. So the 2-pass system will look for variables, names, and create the variable. Like it will make a slot for that variable. And it will then also like make the functions available, which is called hoisting. So it will create the functions so that they're available to be called. Now with the variable, you can see like, well, let me actually put a value in here. With the variable, we are seeing it as undefined, but we're not getting an error. So like the program is running appropriately, even though we are running without having an error. So even though we console log test2 before we've declared it and assigned a value to it, it's not throwing an error. It's actually just saying, hey, that variable exists, but it hasn't had a value assigned to it yet. And so when something hasn't had a value assigned to it yet, that's undefined, right? And that's what we're seeing here in the console is undefined. Now, you know how we talked about var, let, and const. There's like minor differences between them. And one of those differences, besides just const, you're not able to reassign to it, is that if you try to access it before you've assigned to it, it will throw an error. So it's another, and like most of the time, you should not be accessing something before you assign to it. And so that's why they made const that way. It was like an improvement on top of var for the most common use case of declaring something that you want to reuse later. And so that's why when we console log test up here, it's slightly different behavior than when we log test2, in that it throws this error, more significant, trying to tell you you're probably doing something wrong. Okay, so all that to say is there's this 2-pass system in JavaScript when it's evaluating your program. 1 pass through all the lines in the file to set aside variable names and to declare your functions or make your functions available to be called. And then the 2nd pass is what you are used to, which is the line-by-line evaluation of your program. So the 2nd pass is console log hello world, console log test, assign this test value string to test, assign this value string to test2, run the function hello world. Okay. Any questions about that? Good. Okay. So this function here, hello world, not particularly useful. It's not doing anything. One thing we could do is, add a console log or something like that, like console log hello world. And then we can see, I console log, or I commented out this hello world up here. So the only thing console logging hello world is going to be this function. So we go back and look at our code. Oh, sorry, I'm getting that error, which is just like completely stopping the program from running anymore. Okay, there we go. That's another thing like that you just maybe picked up on is when you have an error in your program, it like completely prevents the rest of it from happening. So that it was preventing, like, because this line up here was throwing an error, it prevented the rest of this stuff from running. Okay, so now we've got this function, we're calling it, it's printing hello world to the screen. we're calling the function. It looks like before it's defined, but we know from this 2-pass system that the function is available anywhere within this file, no matter where you declare it. Okay, so this still really isn't that useful. Like we're console logging something, that's fine. But typically, if we're writing a function, we want it to be dynamic. We want it to be something that we can use more than one time. So most of the time with a function, we are saying, hey, there's this code that is useful that I need to potentially reuse in other places. And there's this principle in programming that you often hear about when you're first starting off, which is called dry, which stands for, does anybody know what that stands for? Like in the programming world, what dry stands for?
I don't think I've heard it before.
Okay, sweet. So it stands for do not repeat yourself. And basically
Say that
that
again.
do not repeat yourself.
Alex, come on.
Oh man, that was so good. That went right over my head. Yeah, so do not repeat yourself is what it stands for. And the idea is like you don't want to duplicate your code. You don't want to like have something that you need to reuse and basically you just copy and paste it. You should make a function that you can just call in the multiple places where you need it. So functions are the primary way that we keep our programs smaller, like the less code to achieve an end result of the feature set you're trying to create, the better. And so functions are a primary way to shrink the size of our programs and to make our code cleaner and more reusable. So we saw in the last class that I had made a function that I reused, which was add item to cart. So in the last class, we had on the page the buttons that represented items we might want to add to our cart. And this, like for every single one of them, we needed to say, hey, if you click on this, I need to do something. I need to attach some behavior to when they click. And so we made this add item to cart function so that we could reuse. Now there's not much, but just these 2 lines of code here, the pushing the item to the shopping cart, and then changing the text content of the shopping cart. We didn't want to continue to repeat those 2 lines of code 3 times here because we called that function 3 times here. So we saw an example of that last time. Now, in this case, what is this here called? This item name thing?
Your argument.
Yeah, I heard argument. I think I heard somebody say something else as well.
Parameter?
Yes, yes. So people use those sort of synonymously. So parameter or argument to the function is what this is called. You can have basically as many of these as you want. And so if you need more than one parameter, you can separate them by a comma. So I can do like item name and then something else like item color or something like that potentially. So you can take more than one parameter. Typically when you're writing a function, you're going to take 1 to 4-ish. That's not like a hard and fast rule, but normally you don't have too many parameters to a function. But the reason for this is, hey, we want to reuse this code, but it's not exactly the same code. It's pretty much the same code, but there's some dynamic changing thing whenever I call this function that I potentially need. And in the case of the add item to cart, like add item to cart is the generic thing that we're trying to abstract. Like the code of adding an item to the cart, we want to name and reuse, but we're not adding the same item every time. The dynamic piece is, which item am I adding? Give to me as a parameter of the function the item you want me to add, and then I'll take care of adding it to the cart for you. So you don't need to worry about the cart and how to add things to the cart or whatever. Just tell me the item, right? So that's a really critical piece of functions, is this parameter, this argument, which allows it to be dynamic while still doing, similar things for that dynamic item. So that's what parameters are. So if we go back to the code for today, and we have, hello world, we might change this. We might make a new function, for example, which will be hello to you. Okay. And we want to make a message for somebody, but we want it to be dynamic to them. So based off their name, for example. So if I wanted to have my hello to you message be dynamic based on who they're saying hello to, what do I add to this function?
Parameter.
Yeah, and I probably would just say name for the parameter, right? So name. Now it might be like I have an assumption here that they're going to give me maybe their full name with a space between it, but potentially I could have two parameters, right? First name, last name. Why don't we go ahead and do that just for the exercise? So first name, last name might be our two parameters. And now, where can I reference first name and last name? Like where can I access those values?
Only in the context of the function hello to you.
Yeah, and the context of the function is basically what's in between these curly braces here, right? So at the moment only line 16, but I can add new lines, and anything within these curly braces can reference first name and last name now. Now what if I console log first name with our current program? What's going to happen if we run this? So
Undefined.
yeah, so close. In this
Well,
case,
you can't access first name there, can you? Because you're doing it outside of the braces.
That's right. So I'm referencing first name. It's outside these curly braces, and I am getting an error in this case because it's not defined at all, right? Like it's not that it's undefined, it's that there is no variable made with, and there's no slot for first name, and there's also nothing defined to it either. And so that's why it's throwing an error. Now, let's console log here a message. So let's say, hello to you, comma, and then, well, actually, let me do string concatenation. Hello to you, first name, right? And then let's go ahead and define first name. So let's do console log, let's do const first name equals Zach here. Then we have our function that takes first name, takes in last name as well, does nothing with it at the moment, which is why it's sort of slightly opaque, because I'm not referencing it. So it's like, hey, you didn't do anything with that, so why are you asking for it? It's trying to be helpful, but that's okay at the moment. And then we do console log hello you, hello to you, plus first name, and then we console log first name here. And then let's go ahead and call hello to you, and let's pass in Susan. Okay. So ignore all this stuff at the top and only focus on lines 15 to 24. What do you expect to see in the console when we run this program?
Since it's a constant variable, I don't think it'll work. Possibly, because constant can't be changed, right? It's not a mutable variable.
It's a good instinct, I think.
I think we'd see Zach logged and then hello to you, Susan logged.
Yeah. So that's correct. So we should see, so we define first name, we define the function, we then console log we console log first name, which in this case, and I'll explain it, will be Zach. And then we call hello to you, which passes in Susan, and we console log hello to you, and then Susan. So yes, that's my hypothesis as well. And that's what we do see. So we see Zach, and then we see hello to you, Susan. Okay, so the instinct of, hey, that's probably an error is, I think, good instinct. The thing that's happening here, though, is that there's this notion of global scope. Global scope is the full scope of content, like what are all the variables and the functions defined in the whole file. And in the whole file, that's called the global scope, okay? You'll hear that term. So hello to you is a function in the global scope. First name is a value in the global scope. Test and test2 are values in the global scope, and the hello world function is also a value in the global scope. There is a way to create what's called a local scope. And it's like a private, it's a new space available to you within the global scope. So you've got like this global scope, but then you can sort of, within it, you can make your own sort of local scope that is sheltered from the global scope. So hello to, like, and the only way to do that in JavaScript is with a function. So anytime you declare a function and you then call that function, it is going to, while it's executing that function, it's going to create a local scope for the execution of that function. And so basically the brackets here for our function, hello to you, you know, what the body of the function in here on line 18, that is a local scope to that function, okay? Same thing with the function hello world, line 12 here, that is a local scope for that function. Now it's an interesting thing though. So the global scope cannot reach into your local scope. So there is nothing that can access first name and last name outside of the body of the function. So outside of line 18 in this case. Nothing can grab that value except for the code within the body of the function. So the global can't reach into the local, but the local can reach out into the global. So I can, inside the body of hello to you, I can access test or test2. And indeed, we saw that last week when we were writing our function. Our shopping cart had access to item name, our add item to cart function had access to item name. So item name is a parameter to the function. We use that parameter inside the function, but what am I accessing inside this function that's not defined as a parameter to this function?
Just see the shopping cart.
Yeah, two things. The shopping cart and the shopping cart element are both defined outside the function. But when we ran this function, it worked. And the reason why it worked is because it's got its local scope that it has access to when it's running, which is the item name. But then if you're like, hey, I want the shopping cart, and it's like, oh, that's shopping cart's not actually defined in the local scope of this function, but that's fine. I'll take a step out and go to the global scope and look for that for you. And if it finds it, it's like, okay, I found it. And then here's the current value of that. And, we can do whatever you want with it. So that's the local scope and the global scope. Now, what's interesting is when you start mixing, notice I have first name defined up here, and then I use the exact same name, first name here. And so that's where that's what I was mentioning. I think it was good instincts. It seems like we're redeclaring a constant, and that's not allowed. But there's a concept called shadowing in global and local scope, where you can, I could access first name from the global scope if I wanted to, but since I made it a parameter, it's going to be a parameter inside the body of the function that has the value of not the thing in the global scope, but the value of whatever you passed in when you called it. And so first name here on line inside the body of this function shadows the constant that's defined in the global scope. And we will use the local one inside the body. So, potentially a better example here is if I define last name and I put my last name and I get rid of this parameter here. So now I've got hello to you first name, and then I can do, plus space plus last name. And her last name is not Mays at the moment. Or ever. I don't think we're gonna have her change her name. But anyway, so we have a local scope parameter that shadows this global scope first name, and then we don't have last name as a parameter, and so we're going to reach out and use the one that's in global scope inside this function. So now what do we expect to see when we run this program?
Hello to you, Susan Mooring.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Well, Zach, and then hello to you, Susan Mooring. Yep. Okay. Kind of wild to learn that for the first time. The two pass system and then this local global scope thing all of a sudden. But yeah, that's kind of how that stuff works. Any questions so far?
Yeah, since you have a global first name and then first name as a parameter, is there a way inside of that function to reach out and get the global first name if you also have it as a parameter? Like if you're using it in the function, like using both, or is it just one or the other?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can't get it at that point. I think you're hosed.
Yeah.
Braden, if you're still on, I'd be curious if you know, but I'm pretty sure you're screwed at that point. Though, when you're writing code later, in kind of the modern way we do it, you typically don't want your functions doing that. Like you typically don't want to be reaching out to global scope. You typically want to pass everything in that your function needs to work, if possible. So basically, if your function needs something in the body, then it should be passed in as a parameter. That's not always true. There's certain times where, you know, it's inefficient to do that, but as a general rule, that is a desired behavior typically. Okay, so good question. Any other questions?
So it's preferred to always have a parameter with a function if possible.
Yeah. Now, like, you know, a function may not have a parameter, but it's probably doing some sort of side effect. Like it's like now, and I want to be clear, like pretty much this entire module, there's like literally nothing we can do without side effects, like, and without reaching out into the global state. It's just like the nature of this style of programming. And I'm sorry I'm about to say this again, but once we get to React, that changes quite a bit. So maybe I won't mention some of these things that like just, you know, aren't going to make a ton of sense until later. But yeah, you typically will be writing functions that take a parameter in. But it's totally appropriate, and there's plenty of use cases where you might have one that doesn't take a parameter in. And it'll reach out and do stuff with global scope and change the page and do things like that. But yeah, I think most of the time you should have a parameter.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the missing thing with functions I haven't talked about yet? Does anybody know? Like
Return statement.
Yeah, say that one more time.
Return statement.
Yeah. So functions often take something in through parameters, and more often than not, you want to also give something back. So someone's going to call you, they're going to give you something to do something with, and then you should be kind and give them back something as well. Okay. So in our cases so far, hello to you, like it did something. It did what's called a side effect. It just logged to the console. Or potentially, like in our previous class, we saw, you know, add item to cart. Like it just like mutated the cart. It just added the item to the cart, and then it changed the page. So that's a perfect example of a side effect, you know, changing data and then updating the page. That's like totally appropriate and good. But often you want to be kind and give back something to the person calling your function. And the way you do that is with what's called return. So I am being nice and I'm crafting this message, this hello to you message. I'm going to add last name. Whoa. I'm going to add last name to it. So I'm doing this cool thing. I'm crafting this message. You give me your first name and last name. I'll make this message for you. But I'm like assuming that you want to log it to the console. Okay. And that might not be correct in every scenario. And so we may want to make this program or this function a little bit more dynamic so that people could potentially do other things with this message other than just console log it. They may want to put it on the page. They may want to not console log it, but change the page to have it in an H1 or something, right? So if I return something, it means that this function is a little bit more useful. So the way I do that is instead of console logging, I've got my message crafted here. So this is going to take this string and combine it with that string, and then combine it with that string, and then combine it with that string. And if I want to return this whole thing, I just simply put return in front of it like that. Return space, and then the thing I want to return, which in this case is the one string that's created after concatenating all those things together. So now this is what's called a pure function, which is a cool, useful function. It takes in parameters it doesn't reach into global scope, and it doesn't do any side effects, and it returns something to me. So like every time I call this function, with the same inputs, I'm going to get the same outputs. And so this is, you don't need to remember pure function and all the things that make up it, but basically something that has parameters and returns something is often like kind of the form of a function that you're shooting for, unless you are trying to do side effects like update the page or something like that. And the reason why I'm saying that, and why that's kind of what you're shooting for, is that the more you write your code that way, the more like Lego pieces you have available to you that you can sort of like, it makes it easier to update your program and change it over time. With software, we're constantly trying to add new things and tweak things and add new features. And if we write our code in a way that's more reusable, you can like, oh, I need this one new function, but I already have two other functions that kind of do what I need. And so if I just call these two functions and call this one and pass that into it, now I've got this new feature I need, and I don't have to like refactor a bunch of my code to make it work. So it's just a good practice to do it this way. It's useful when you're working on a team. So now if I want to console log the message from hello to you, so I've got hello to you down here that I'm calling. I'm passing in Susan. I'm going to go ahead and, since I updated this to have last name, I'm going to go ahead and pass that in now. And so just like how you can make two parameters and separate them with a comma when you're declaring the function, whenever you're calling the function, you simply separate the values you want those parameters to take by a comma. So you can see, this here is kind of taking the shape of, this is kind of taking the shape of that for when you call it. Okay, so now that I have hello to you returning something, if I want to keep it, like if I want to be able to reference that later, what do I need to do on this line?
Create it as a variable.
Sorry, say that one more time.
Create it as a variable.
Yeah, exactly. So we can do const message equals the result of calling this function. So message will become whatever this function returns. And so now if I want to console log it, I can. And so if we go back, we pretty much see what we were saying before. Hello to you, Susan Mooring. But we decoupled that desired behavior of logging to the console from the function itself. So now this function is much more useful and transportable and reusable because of the way that we wrote it. Okay. So functions are amazing, and they're a great way to clean up our code as well. So if you kind of look back at what we were doing in the last class, there's just like a bunch of code just kind of grouped together, and like just based off how I'm doing my new lines and stuff like that, I'm like sort of saying like this stuff is related to that. And so like at the beginning, there's just like a bunch of stuff like building on top of each other. Notice like we did this prompt, what is your name? And then we grabbed the first name initial, and then we figured out where the space was in it so that we could split like first and last name. And then we got the last name initial. And so like this here is like 3 lines of code that are very grouped, like they depend on each other and they're building up on top of each other. And so that, like, the primary way to clean up our code and keep it organized and to really sort of make those relationships clear, we will write functions. So we'll turn this stuff that we have here into a function that's like create avatar string or you know, create first name, last name, initial string from full name. Like that's the function we might declare, and that's the name we might give to it. And you would pass it a full name parameter. And then it would handle this logic here, right? And now you've got that function in your code and you can use it anywhere because, you know, on your page, you might need that avatar string in a bunch of different places. You might need it in the top right for the person that's logged in. You might need it in certain cards if you're like listing a bunch of different users or something like that in a table, or you might need that avatar string there. And so by making that a function that we can reference, our code is much smaller and cleaner. And it's easier to understand and read because we're doing that grouping of the code. And then we're also giving it a nice name describing what it's doing. So you can read the function name and often understand what the code's going to do, assuming that you give it a good descriptive name. Okay, I want to stop us here just so we have time to make it to Tech++ on time. So that was your whirlwind intro into functions. I hope it's clicking. If it's not, I would go through the free code camp material again. But yeah, functions are amazing. I hope you guys like them.
Right on.
Cool. All right. Thanks, gang. And remember, this upcoming Saturday is a much longer class. And because we're doing, sorry, I'm just taking a screen. Though my screenshot was just to see who made the class today. But yeah, Saturday is going to be a longer class. It's our exercise class, so we'll be trying to kind of implement everything we've learned so far. So be prepped to spend it, you know, probably like 3.5 hours for class on Saturday if you can. All right, gang. See you at Tech++, but if not, then I'll see you Saturday.
See you there.
Thank you.
Sounds good.